Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting video. So in today's video we'll be discussing the variants of the 737, my favorite aircraft. So let's get started with the video. So now before we go into the variants of the 737, we need to first discuss where we are now with the 737 and how we started with the 737. So now this is not kind of a time machine game, but you need to use your imagination skill, just like the let's do a flight together video. So now you need to take yourself approximately more than 55 years back, and now let's go to 1967 USA and Everett. So yeah, now we are here in 1967. You can see Boeing is working on a brand new aircraft, the middle short range aircraft. It's called the Boeing 737. They're working on it. They have all the customers planned, everything. So now the original variant of the 737, actually there are four types. Before we go into the variants, we need to discuss what were the types these variants were classified into. Okay, so now I'm just telling you the classification. They were called the originals, the early 737s. Then they were called next generation aircraft, the originals and the next generation aircraft, and the fourth generation. Okay, now these were the three types they were classified into. So yeah, let's go deep dive into 77. Okay, so now when the originals were first launched, before we get to know this launch of the 77, we need to know which were the originals of the 737. Okay, so now these variants were the 737 100, 200, 300, 400 and 500. Okay, these were called the originals of the 737. And now we have talked about the original, then we should talk about the next generation of the aircraft: 600, 700, 800 and 900. Okay, now we have discussed this. Now we need to talk about the fourth generation, that is obviously know that the 77 max. So it's max 7, max 8, max 9 and max 10. Okay, now let's go back to 1967 again. So yeah, today is a big day for Boeing and the launch customer. Before I tell you the launch customer, okay, it's a very big day for everyone. The 77 is finally getting launched in its first original version, the 737-100, and the launch customer is all ready to receive its brand new aircraft and put it into service before all the other airlines. So the launch customer of the 737-100, the first variant of the 737, sorry, I'm getting it 747 because I love that aircraft so much. Okay, so the first launch customer of 737-100 was Lufthansa, the German flag carrier airline. So they started operations with the aircraft with the 737-100. So I'm not going to tell you more about the launch customers of the other variants of the 737. So now let's we talked about the 100, and now let me tell you something very good about the 737 original, the first two variants engine. Okay, now we did the classification. Okay, so now we need to go into the variants. In that classification of the originals, there, as we discussed, there were this one five variants. So the first two variants actually had a very good interesting engine type. Okay, now come back to 2024. So now imagine you're standing at an airport and looking at an aircraft take off. How is the engines? You say they look normal and they're all modern engines, but what if I tell you most of you may not even know about it, or most of you know about it? Okay, 77, 100 and 200 are the engines which were like a hollow tube. Okay, they were like a very hollow tube, and it to mount the engines there were okay. And when it comes to mounting the engines, we'll talk about that later. They were like a very hollow tube, and the obviously knows everyone knows that the front of the engine takes there and throws it out the back. So now let's talk about the reverse thrust in the 100 and 200 specifically. Okay. Now, go back to my other video when I told you which aircraft did not need a tug to push its way out, way back from the gate. So that was the 727, and I told you that there was a bucket kind of a thing which would open, and then obviously redirect the airflow towards the inside of the engine. Actually, the 737 100 and 200 also had the same type of thing. It was only in the 300 variant, reverse thrust, which we are now used to today, which reverse the door opens or it comes out like this, is was introduced. Okay. Now you may ask, if these variants of this aircraft had the reverse thrust, why couldn't it push back on the gates on its own? I told you that the other day in the video. It had to deal with aerodynamics, and obviously rear mounted engines were the best with aerodynamics than engines which were mounted on the wing of the aircraft. So now let's coming to the now we talked about the originals of the 767. Now let's coming to the cockpit of each variant. Okay, let's just get that straight. Okay. Now coming to the originals. So these variants obviously had the steam gauged analog cockpit, which you wouldn't see in aircraft today because they're equipped with a digitalized cockpit. Okay, so now these steam gauges, obviously I told you when I introduced the 747-200 to my fleet, I told you there were four sets of engine instrument, the engine pressure ratio, the hydraulic pressure, and the pressurization. Yeah, it was the same, except instead of four rows, there were only two rows because it's a twin engine aircraft. Easy peasy. Now, when we come to the digitalized cockpit, which we are now used to today, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, all had the steam gauge analog cockpit. Now, coming to the next generation, which is 600, 700, 800, 900. Okay. Now, these variants had a digitalized cockpit, which we are now used to today, like not a steam gauge analog thing which tells us the engine value in some complicated digits. It wasn't like that. Okay, there were two engine instruments which we can see on the pilot's primary flight display. It was in the middle of the cockpit and it showed N1 and N2. What is N1 and N2? You may ask more of that in another video. Okay, it showed the thrust the engine was producing in a simple, this one kind of a simple row kind of a thing instead of uh, two sets of four of those rotating steam gauge analog displays. Yeah. So now, and we have discussed about the originals and the next generation. Now let's come to the fourth generation. Okay. These variants are one of my favorite of all time. The Max 7, Max 8, Max 9, and Max 10. Okay, the Max 7 is undergoing certification, but my favorite variant of the 737 Max, the Max 8, because of its speed, because it's a very fast aircraft. Okay, now these Max things. Now let's coming to the engines and the wing. Why you may ask, why is the engine? Everything is same. It has only a double bogie landing gear like all the 737 variants, and it doesn't have a landing gear door. It's common, but coming to the engines and wings, it's a totally different one. Okay. Okay, now the let's coming to the easier part, the wing. Obviously engines are more complicated than wings, so now let's come. Earlier variants were equipped with Pratt and Whitney engines or CFM 56 engines. Okay, now let's see what this wing, instead of a winglet which comes out like this, or no wingtips at all. More about winglets in another video. This thing also had winglets, but it was a twin winglet wing. What do you mean twin winglet? It was shaped in kind of a crocodile's mouth, you can say. Okay, one winglet is standing up like this, the other winglet is standing down like this. It's like this. Sorry, I cannot bend my hand fully down, but yeah, just imagine. Okay. Now, if you can see, I'll combine my both hands. Now, this is how the wing look like. Okay. Now, coming to the engines, I told you instead of Pratt and Whitney engines or CFM56 engine, this aircraft is equipped with CFM56 Leap 1 Bravo engines. Okay, and these are obviously bigger in size than the older 737 engines. Yeah. Now, yeah, these are older and obviously captured. There's a lot of thrust, hence giving it more speed. As you all know, the bigger the size, bigger the thrust to weight ratio and max speed. Now, let me tell you which was the most popular variant of the 737. Okay, I'll give you 5 seconds to guess that. Okay, now if you know the variant of the 737, put it in the comment below and I'll give you a thumbs up and a like to your comment. Okay, I'll give you 5 seconds. Five, four, three, two, one. You guessed it? Very good. If you guessed it, I'll tell you what it is. It is the 737-800 because a lot of airlines purchased this variant when it was first introduced because this was a very friendly variant. It was not like this one. It had a very perfect cabin layout, seating, very good for the pilots and very easy to handle short haul aircraft. So you got to know the variants of 77 and bye bye. Have a good day.